All right, I'm recording. I'm with Joy. Joy, introduce yourself to us, real quick.
Uh, Let me get rid of this off of my screen that says got it. I got it. Okay.
Nice.
Uh, my name is Joy Strouse, and I live in northern Baltimore County.
Yeah, we're like blocks away from each other, which is very
Yeah,
cool.
met on an international summit, actually.
Mm-hmm. Which
That
was
was,
which is funny to meet a neighbor
yeah,
on an
yeah, it
international
is.
summit. Yeah. So where are you in your author journey?
So I am right now in the midst of writing a prequel to my published novel, which was my first novel. Um, I've written all my life, but uh, never had the time and peace and quiet to sit down and actually write the novel that was in my head.
Yeah,
And so that came from COVID. That was my COVID silver lining.
that's right. The
We'll
been
say
the we all kind of, I think all of authors
this one.
found some, it's a fun book. I think we all kind of found some kind of way to get more writing in during COVID, which was,
Yeah,
lock us
yeah.
down and we tend to produce things.
And it
Um,
gave us our sanity.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so talk to me about give me a brief sketch of how this book is a prequel.
Um, the original book was set in the 70s and 80s,
Okay.
and it dealt with family dynamics, uh, domestic abuse, and the cycle of domestic abuse.
Hmm.
So um, I wanted to give the background of the family that the antagonist came from. Um, and my main, I guess, theme is that, families are complicated and dynamics of interacting with each other, and that this cycle of abuse that starts it's kind of a seed. So
Hmm.
I just wanted to give the background of this guy. um, so I went back to 1936, um, and I'm right now at 1956 in the story, but
Nice. So the story's about Bonnie, right?
right.
Bonnie slash Eliza.
Mhm.
How does she show up in the other book?
She shows up. People talk about her. she she has Everybody thinks she's dead,
Okay.
but in reality, she is still alive and under an alias. And So she shows up. People talking about her, and then they discover some letters from her. So the protagonist does know she's alive and
Okay.
gets a little hint of what her life was like from
Okay.
these letters.
Okay. So we need her writing letters. We need to explain her disappearance in this book, disappearance and reappearance.
Right.
Anything else in this book that we definitely have to hit? I'm asking you these questions. So we were going to work on plot today. I'm asking you these
Right. Right.
questions
Right.
to kind of set up like, okay, what do we have? Where are like boundaries? What do we have to get in? Because it's a prequel. It's like, we don't want to stray too far from
Right.
where the frame has already been set.
Well, and in the first book, you really only know her as the sister of the man's father.
Okay.
Um, and you only know that there was a fire in the house, the parents were killed, and um, the father covered for her. He's the only one who knew she was still alive. He covered for her and said, she was in the basement. Here, I found her. They found her necklace, but they never found her body. But
Gotcha.
going to dig in the the rubble. So and then the letter says that she's now living in Florida, but it's only the one or two letters shortly after she disappears.
Okay.
So after the fire. So the rest of her life is pretty much unwritten.
Okay. Great. Um, so talk to me about what problem we're solving today. What do you hope to work through today? Like how can I most help you in
um,
this?
well, I think my main thing is that I've I have several ideas for the big climax of this second book.
Okay.
So I'm trying to nail down what would be the best, have the most impact.
Okay. Talk to me about those ideas.
Okay.
So
So
yeah, well, but wait, I'm sorry, before we get there, Joy, what do you
okay.
mean by big climax?
Um you're building up to the
Okay, so the
major,
big like reveal in the end, like the da da kind of
well, yes, and the catalyst leading up to that. So in other
perfect.
words, is there another murder? Is there I'm trying to remember what I wrote down here for you.
I
Um,
hear I can put it up.
oh,
Got it.
was somebody, yeah, I'm guessing that somebody is murdered or something along those
Gotcha.
lines.
Okay.
Uh,
So we need a big
so,
pop.
and that's going to have reveal her to the family.
Okay. Gotcha. Um, so right now this is your timeline up. Let's talk something I really like that you've done with this story is you've broken it into, you sent me this document as like paragraphs, and I broke it into sections
Okay.
based on kind of like the storyline you were telling. So the reason I'm going to go through this real quick is because the climax we need to set up the climax at the beginning of the book, right?
Right.
So where we're headed needs to set up the beginning. And there needs to be moments of like questioning whether or not she'll get there. And then the climax needs to be like the big payoff, not just of action, but of
Right.
character growth and of like who
Right.
she's becoming.
So yeah, so my feeling was her personal growth climaxes that she doesn't really realize the full extent of her own abuse. So all
Okay.
through, you know,
So
so
it's
that's
like a
kind of
coming to
going to be
terms with
her
abuse.
personal thing.
Okay. Let me drop this one in the screen. So I just put this in a little chart so we could kind of
Okay.
see how we're moving here. So the big climax here is coming to terms with her abuse, is what you're saying, right?
Right.
And you want this to happen in 82 through 90, sometime in there?
Yes.
Okay. So we have abusive childhood in 15. You have this story of her and her brother burning down their house to escape parents. She then in 52 meets this woman, Kate, and they become friends, and Kate kind of gives her a new identity as Eliza.
Right. Right.
Right. And this is that disappearance that you were talking about
Right.
that happens in the book. That needs to connect to the first book. So we've got that that's misspelled, but we're just gonna leave it how it is. That, that is a bad spelling of that word.
That's all right. That's why we have spell check, right? I'm a
Yeah,
terrible
we're
speller.
just gonna do dis, and you and I know what that means. And that way I don't have to look at my own terrible spelling. Um, so then we've got she meets this guy Connor in 52 and 54. We
Uh-huh.
have their first kind of tryst,
Uh-huh.
and the mob gets involved a little bit.
Uh-huh.
In 54 through 56, a restaurant is built that she works at, and she and Connor have a fling that fails because he's married to Virginia.
Right.
In 64, we have a fling that succeeds, and her daughter is born. And then
Oh,
we've
no,
got,
Dawn is not her daughter.
oh, who's Dawn? I'm
Dawn
sorry.
is the sister from the first book, so it's her niece.
Ah, gotcha. Okay.
Yes, I guess I didn't. Yeah, I didn't fill that part in, did I?
No, that's
Yeah.
totally fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so niece is born, and then 78 through 81, we're a little vague on still.
Right.
And 82 through 90, where something needs to happen, then she comes to terms with her abuse.
Right.
Um, what I love about what you've done here is that you've got your plot broken into these sections, which makes it super easy for character growth. Because when it comes to like dealing with her childhood trauma, each stage of this we can set up a like, is this the right or the wrong way to deal with trauma?
Okay.
Right. So, and in 82 through 90, you finally want her coming to terms with her trauma. So my question for you is like, how do you see her in each piece of this growing and changing as a character? If she's in conversation with her trauma, like let's think of her trauma as a romantic partner, and she's going to have this relationship with her trauma all through her life.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that relationship is healthy, sometimes that relationship is unhealthy. How does that relationship change over time? And I'm asking you this because that'll lead us to what the relationship between her and her trauma finally becomes. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
So 1951, what would you say her relationship with her trauma is?
I think that is where she's burying it.
Okay.
Um, that she, yeah.
Okay. So she
I,
buries the trauma in 51. Is that a positive or negative reaction to what's going on?
well, I think it's a way for her to get through.
Okay.
So in other words, um, you know, like the steps of grief, that you become numb for a while, until you can actually deal with it. So that's
Gotcha.
where that starts. She starts to um, forget about exactly how abusive her father was.
Gotcha.
Um,
Okay. So I'm gonna line these yellow cards up along the bottom so that we can think of them as like time moments
okay.
in time. And then what we'll do is across the top here, we will we're actually going to do a graph because
Okay.
we want your this is where the other book starts, but we're going to erase that for right now. We want her to go on this journey with trauma in that the reader sees her growing and changing with each stage,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
So if we've got time along here on the bottom of your graph, that's a terrible line. We've got time along here on the bottom of your graph. And then we have here, sorry, I gotta move my little zoom window. And then we have here uh health, right? Or her the healthiness of her relationship with her trauma.
Okay.
Positive here and negative here. We know we want her to end in this like coming to terms with the full extent.
Right. Okay.
Um, I cannot spell today. Excuse me for 1 second. Could you hear my son singing in the background?
Oh no, I can't.
Okay,
Darn.
good. As long as you can't hear it.
Usually it's my daughter is singing in the background too. So.
That's really funny. So we're gonna end up here coming to terms with full trauma. Here we're surviving and pushing away. Are we gonna see any of 1936 and before, or is that gonna remain a mystery in the book?
Yes, it's there's as of this moment, the first three chapters are her
Okay.
life before.
Okay. So living in abuse. Um, all right. And then she pushes it away. That feels like a positive move to me.
Hmm.
Not a super victorious move, but we're at least moving forward in her relationship. She's at least relieving herself from trauma.
Right.
When she becomes Eliza, what does her relationship with her trauma become?
I would say at that point she's still uh, well, she reinvents herself. So she doesn't there are mentions and little things that she does that make it come forefront in her mind.
Okay.
It's still, she's still in denial, so to speak,
Okay.
of,
So
of
she's
how
into
bad what she actually lived through.
gotcha. So she's like running from it,
Yeah, that's
trauma
good way
by
to say
pretending to be
it.
someone else. Um,
And I think also um, somewhere in this next area with Connor, um, that she begins to feel like she's not she is possibly worthy of someone's love,
Okay.
uh, kind of thing, so that would probably be the next step.
Okay.
But
So we're gonna make this one a little more negative,
okay.
and we need an extent here that like part of the reason she agrees to become Eliza is because she sees Bonnie as worthless.
Right, got it.
Right. Because what, and so what we're playing with here is like reader expectations. What does the reader want her journey to be? So, what the reader would want her journey to be is her living in abuse, her surviving trauma and escaping, her, the ideal, like, hey, let's get out of this, is her finding some place of peace and solace where she discovers herself in a new way. Her building a community around her and her living happily ever after. That's like, oh, this is where we want her life to go, right? Where her life is actually going is she survives trauma by pushing it away. So we start off with that, like, oh, we're going to find healing from this. But then she retreats back into this, like, I'm worthless. I'm no good. I have to go be Eliza because Bonnie needs to go away. Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So, and then you're saying with Connor, she starts to feel like maybe I can be loved again.
Right.
Does she ever try to tell him who she really is, or does she still hiding Bonnie completely?
She is he knows that he actually helps her get her forged um birth certificate, which is where the mob comes in.
Okay.
But he doesn't know. She doesn't reveal her past. He just knows she has something she's running from.
Is she tempted to reveal her past and then holds back from revealing?
Um, Probably, yes, I would
Okay.
say so. Yeah,
So,
and I think she gives inklings of it,
okay.
but she's very afraid that she's not ready to reveal that because
Yeah.
you know.
So we'll have a nice, actually kind of two beat thing here in this section. You need to focus on like building their relationship and this idea of like maybe I can be loved again. So we'll start to kind of drift up into that like better territory again for the reader. Like,
Okay.
oh, her relationship with Connor is going to save her, but then in the end, she needs to decide, um, Bonnie can't come out, right? Still worthless.
Uh-huh.
And so we'll drop her character growth back down again. So you'll get this nice little like bump for the reader of like, oh, maybe things will be okay. Now, just to warn you, we need something to happen here that makes her say, nope, back into hiding.
Um, okay. So I guess when he finally, when they split up, um, she I would say that she throws herself into the restaurant, and she does take up with another man who is emotionally abusive to her,
Why did they split up?
because um, he all through their relationship, and it's a long distance relationship.
Okay.
He's in Boston and she's in Florida, so it's a letters, and they only see each other a few times.
Gotcha.
He's engaged, and there's a reason why he can't leave the girl, but then he decides he's going to leave her, and then she gets pregnant, so then you know
Gotcha.
they
Okay.
have to he has to go.
So Virginia gets pregnant.
Right.
Now, is that this fling in 54 or is that this fling in 56 and 54 through 56?
That's 54 through 56, really,
Okay.
that part.
Okay.
um,
Where does she get involved with the dude that's bad news?
right after that, so 56.
Okay. So really we have these two beats kind of stretching across 54 to 56.
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay. So she meets Connor and she's like, maybe I can love again. Maybe maybe I can be loved again. Maybe I can be Bonnie. but then Virginia gets pregnant, Connor leaves her. So like Bonnie can't come out, I'm still worthless, and then we get her sinking back into an abusive relationship.
Hmm. And also in the 56 part, um, is when from the other book, um, her brother Floyd, uh, his second his his second child, the baby is dies.
Okay.
So that's a big catalyst, in the first book, which I bring into this book, that he talks about it.
How
Um,
does that have an impact on Bonnie?
uh, well, because it was her nephew, first of all.
Okay.
She does get to meet Ricky, who is the antagonist from the first book. He's 4 years old. She does meet him, and then she finds out, then the baby is due. The baby is born, and Floyd writes her a letter saying, you know, and the baby is killed because Floyd roll, rolls over on it and smothers it in the
Oh wow.
bed
Okay.
because he's drunk.
Yeah, yeah.
so um, I have a letter from Floyd there, at the end of, I guess, right
Yeah,
in this part, um, that I have to believe it was crib deck. I couldn't have done that, and blah blah blah, and or else I'm sending myself straight to hell. So Floyd is the it's kind of like Floyd does not survive the abuse, that he sinks, and she starts to rise there.
yeah. Okay.
Um, so
So
then you see a
there
marked difference in the way they're dealing with, the original abuse from the father.
so there's a couple ways. Let's stick with the death of the nephew for a second, because there's a couple ways when we have events in a story like that. We don't actually like what happens is important, but what happens is less important than how what happens impacts our character.
Exactly.
So like there's a couple ways you can go with that. Like Floyd's nephew can die and Bonnie can see herself as a mirror of Floyd and be like, this is our lot in life. Things are hopeless. There's nothing to go. There's no way to get out of this horrible life. If that's the case, the nephew dying needs to happen right here and drive her into this relationship where she's like, I guess I have to settle for this abusive guy. Does that make sense? That
Okay.
would be that would be one way to work the plot. Another way to work the plot would be like Floyd being like, my nephew died, crib death. I can't take responsibility for it. It's too hard. Bonnie rallying and being like, I don't, I don't want this life. I'm not going to accept this life. I don't believe that we are destined for this way. If that's the case, then you want the crib death to happen here because it's the catalyst for her leaving the abusive guy. Does that
Okay.
make sense? So if
Mm-hmm.
you've got this crib death, which way does that send her? Does that send her down a negative spiral, or is that her turning point where she's like, I'm not accepting this anymore?
um Probably, I'm not more, I think it's kind of a down then up. I mean, um I think at first she doesn't realize that he's abusive, because he's worldly, he's an artist. She learns a lot of, um things from him, and so at first she doesn't even see the abuse. So I'm not sure. I'm still playing with that relationship.
Okay.
Um, and I
Yeah.
and I was going to, because there's so many years, I was going to kind of make that the catalyst to um, to start part two and make the jump from 56 to 64, and
Yeah. And I would,
kind of just fill that in with, some backstory as we go, but
yeah,
not have it on a timeline thread.
I would say you're kind of already in part two. So I see
Right.
your story having right now three distinct parts, right? You've got
Okay. Uh-huh.
this, and then here, like this. So, and the classic, because you've got this romance going in the background, so it kind of leads to this kind of layout of, this first section is self or denial and escape,
Hmm.
right? If we think of it in Les Mis terms, even
My
though Les
daughter was
Mis,
in that play.
was she nice, even though it is about even though Les Mis isn't about we're dealing with the rebirth of a person. So we're dealing with like the rebirth of Jean Valjean, right? He escapes from prison, steals candlesticks, and is like, you know, Jean Valjean is nothing now. I'm going to go be Monsieur. I can't remember what they call him, but he's got like, he takes on a new name, he takes on a new life, and he's like, I'm just going to deny that I was this person and hide in this new
Uh-huh.
identity. So you've got her here, denial, and I would actually say hiding. Um, then in this next section, we've got her, what is Jean Valjean's kind of like trying to live as the mayor. We've got her like life in hiding.
Right.
And for him, for that story, what brings him out of life in hiding is this death of this woman that he's supposed to be caring for. And he's like, you know what? I'm done hiding now. I'm just going to be myself. And then we finally get in his story, he takes the daughter of the woman he was supposed to be caring for, and he starts this new life as a father. Right? So he's still in hiding. He's not his full self, but he's got this like new you know, forward movement life.
Right.
He's not
Where
fully engaged yet, but he's
and
like, yeah, things are different, and I'm actually living a life at this point.
right. And she actually has invested the money that she took from the house when she, you know, her father's dirty money, so to speak, um, in the restaurants. So she has become and has invested it. So she has become a wealthy person, just
Nice.
like he does. And I never made that connection, but it is one of my favorites.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Yeah. So, and then in the end here, we have to end with this full acceptance of me. In Les Mis, that happens on his deathbed, right? Like he's dying, and he's finally like, let me fully reveal to you who I am. This is my life. I was this person. I did these things. I've lived this life. I'm ashamed of something I did. So the thing that runs through this kind of like full acceptance of me plot is always a shame of an event, of like, I did this thing that I need to be ashamed of. If you go this route with her, her shame comes here. She kills her family, right? She
Right.
escapes trauma by killing her family. This is the shame. It's very similar in the Jean Valjean story, in that his shame is actually something that like the rest of us wouldn't, like, it's morally ambiguous. He's stealing bread to feed children. So
Right.
it's the same here, where she's like trying to escape physical and sexual abuse, but she does this thing that she views as terrible. and
Right.
and yeah. Excuse me, I can't. Sorry, he's singing at full voice. I gotta tell him to stop. Hold on a sec. Sorry, he's singing "Shut Up and Dance" at full volume.
What is he singing?
This is pop songs in his headphones, and I can't.
Oh,
I was just ignoring it for a while, but I can't ignore it anymore.
oh, that's
I
too
can't hear
funny.
myself talk. Okay, so how does this feel to you? This kind of movement?
Yeah, I think that's where we're going. Yes.
Okay, so then to align events up with this, here we need oh, that's not what that is. Here we need this moment where she meets Connor, and this other guy. So you kind of want to develop here some kind of love triangle, right? That would be the kind of the theme of this section is, love triangle between where Bonnie's deciding between future abuser and um Connor. And then the decision is actually removed from her when Connor tells her Virginia's pregnant.
Okay.
So then she's like, this is the best I can do.
Okay. So yeah. So in my mind, what I was thinking was that when Connor leaves her, that that's when she goes to the other guy,
Yeah.
because
Yep.
she didn't have any kind of relationship with him until that. So you're saying it would be better for her to start a relationship with him, kind of.
I don't think it would be,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't like the word better because there's no better
Gotcha.
words. Yeah, I would find it more interesting
Okay.
because the what you're doing here with that is setting up again, the whole story is about her relationship with her trauma. So what you're doing here is setting up this relationship between the men represent her self-acceptance.
Okay.
Connor is healthy for her. Connor is like gonna be the best version of herself. Being with him makes her feel like she could reveal who she really is. This like dark moment in her past, right?
Hmm.
She feels like, okay, this ghost that's haunting me, I could let him know this. Um, I could let him know this if we could just spend more time together. I think I could like reveal my true self to him. Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
And so when he says no, she's forced to go with the man who sees her only as Eliza, and you get this defeat moment where she's like, I guess this is the best I can do.
Got it. Okay.
Right.
Hmm.
Which is why you want to set that tension up between the two men early, where this guy's courting her, but she has these letters from Connor that she's hiding.
Okay. Got it.
And like you're saying, the second guy needs to be charming, he needs to be attractive, but she also needs to be aware that he is um not ideal.
Got it.
And we need to see that in this part of the story, we need to see that kind of de-escalate into more abuse. Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
But you got to see her just accepting it. But then here, like you're saying, we have the nephew die.
Right.
And the nephew dies, you want to use as this turning point. Um, and where she's like, I don't have to take this. Right. I don't have to, this isn't my lot in life. I don't have
Okay.
to live this way. Which it's really nice that you have a time jump here because you get to jump when we meet her again, she's living a different life. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yeah. Very much like Valjean, where there's a time jump where he finds Cosette as a little girl, and then the next time we meet them, she's a young woman.
Right.
Does that make sense? And they have this new life together.
See, it's all in my subconscious.
It's all there. It's all
I'm
well,
down, down, down.
yeah. I mean, the truth is, I think we just tell the same story over and over again.
Right.
There's
Right.
some beauty in that. I mean, we won't get into story theory. That's not so. The end of this, just like that line you just sang, the end of this needs to be a big heroic moment where she
Okay.
tells this guy off. She gets the letter. about her nephew, and the Floyd kind of saying like, this is horrible. I can't believe I did this. I can't do this. We need her to have a moment where she's like, no, this isn't what our life is meant to be. It doesn't have to be this way. And going to then escape from this other guy. That's awful. You had put so what happens here? You said when we meet her back up, she's actually doing well. She's running this restaurant. She's pretty wealthy, and then she has this relationship with Connor.
Yes, they
Talk to me
meet.
about this period here.
So she opens a couple restaurants,
Okay.
and they're doing well. And she has invested in real estate in Florida. So of course, we know what happens in Florida. That era, that golf courses everywhere, et cetera, and
Yeah.
so forth, and Disneyland, and I mean Disney World, and
Yeah.
all that. So
Which is a nice tie into your Baltimore thing, because the streetlights in Disneyland are the old Baltimore streetlights.
oh, I forgot about that.
It's a nice tie-in. Yeah.
I'll have to make sure to
Something to
tie
play
that
with a
in.
little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, because those, as for anybody, if we do have people listening to this potentially. So if anybody's listening, Baltimore lore is that we used to have all these classic old streetlights all throughout large sections of the town that were these kind of like beautiful gaslit type things. And one of our mayors sold them to Disney World. So when they built Disney World, they came and took out all the Baltimore streetlights and took them down to Florida.
I
Um,
also do have the quarries, the marble quarries
oh, nice.
where the Washington Monument.
Yeah, yeah, where they dug out the stone for the monument. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so she's owning her own restaurant. Connor reappears, and they're gonna have a relationship now.
Yes.
Okay. Positive relationship.
Positive relationship.
Okay.
Positive relationship. He's grown. He's not quite as self-centered, and I mean, he was a college kid, so he's grown. She's obviously grown, and so they can have a more mature relationship. Um, and then he's her leaning post, so to speak.
Yeah. So this is another
So,
upswing
but she's an
movement.
independent person at that point. So,
Yeah. So this is another upswing movement in your story,
uh-huh.
right? And what's nice about this is that what I like about what you're doing with the story is that, so often in these romance stories, it's the relationship that saves the woman, but you're actually having her save herself, which is great. And then having her now re-enter into this relationship. And
Yeah,
so this is a fun part of the story where he's going to have to woo her back,
yeah,
because her is going to be like, I don't know why I need you. Does that make sense? Like, I'm
right.
independent, I'm alone, I like what I'm doing. Still hasn't come to terms with her trauma yet. Still won't admit that she has this secret hiding back here.
Uh-huh.
You had said at some point in your notes that you sent me that there's rumors that she's a vigilante.
Well, she kind of. I've put a couple little things in there that give a thought to. Well, did she do? Like, she witnesses um a woman smacking her child at the hotel, and then the later on the woman suddenly, and the woman sells Avon,
Okay,
and then later on the woman has a horrible facial rash, and she says, guess she got the wrong. And there's uh talk of the oleander that grows at the restaurant in the wilds.
gotcha. Yeah,
So so you kind of are like, I'll bet she did that,
nice.
kind of
I would add
those
that
kind of
here.
little things.
Yeah, I would add that here, that she's harming abusers, because you want her healed so that she can be in a good place with Connor, but you also still want a little darkness going on. of
Right.
something she hasn't dealt with, right?
Right. Right.
Like again, because we're using the metaphor, like Inez, he's has a relationship with Cosette, and he's being a father, and he's living out the duties that he promised her mother he would, but he's also, and in some ways, healing his initial wound of not being able to feed children, having to steal to feed siblings. Now he's feeding and like caring for somebody. So he's got that like heal, which is what you're showing here, where she's established a life. She's in this romance, Connors. But at the same time, he's like, Jean Valjean has locked himself behind walls, right? Like, and
Mhm.
he's like still in hiding of who he is. So you need some kind of dark side to what's happening with her.
Right.
This is a good place to have those vigilante stories where she's harming people. I might even have Connor find out about it and be like, "What are you doing?" Right? Like, what is happening here? Um, because it'll create this question where he's like, "Wait, did you do that?" And she can be like, "You don't understand." And he can be like, "What don't I understand?" And she's like, "I can't tell you."
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So then we finally need, when you get to your, so are you starting to feel the climactic moment here?
Yes. Yes.
Where we're like moving into. We need something big to happen here at the end of the story. You need a big event where it triggers, let me tell you who I am. And you can kind of see this big event is going to have to deal with stopping an abuser without violence
Okay.
and admitting that I was a victim. Right? Like that's what needs to occur here, where there's a full confession. Because we've got, if you look at her relationship with her abuse, we've got denial, right? We've got some kind of sorry, we've got denial, we've got this mourning, like a negative acceptance. Then we've got a fighting against her abuse, and then we have to come to like acceptance of like, so here you almost want her to have the attitude toward abuse, especially this where she's harming abusers, of this like, no one will help people, right? So this is her justification for hurting others, is this like, hey, no one else is going to help.
Okay.
So then here we have the like, there needs to be a moment, somebody she knows and loves, maybe you bring back Kate here, somebody she knows and loves needs to be abused,
Okay.
and she needs to step in and handle it the right way, and that'll lead to this confession with Connor that like, hey, here's who I am. How does that feel?
That's a good way to go about it. Yeah. I and I was kind of feeling like at the end that she's writing all this or revealing all this kind of either to Dawn, the niece, or to someone um else. And then she doesn't even, at the end, she kind of, it all comes back to her as to just how abused she was. And so then she, you know,
Yeah, you may
kind of
want to,
revealing herself to herself too.
yeah, you may want to write a, you may want to do it in like, because I saw you're writing in first person, which is great.
Uh-huh.
um you may want to just lean into that letter concept and start at the very beginning of, with like, I'm trying to think who I read recently that did this. There's a style of first person that's like
Well,
first person omniscient from the future. So you're like
I was
writing
thinking
back.
like Great Gatsby.
Yeah, Great
He's
Gatsby.
writing in his journal, kind of.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what's nice about that is that she is trying to explain why she made the decision she did.
Hmm.
And what's good about that in this kind of story is that you can, as she tells these stories, you can have her self-reflection on whether this is a positive or negative season of
Okay.
life. When she explains the murder and that she ran away from it, you can actually have her voice saying, like, I just wasn't ready to accept that.
Okay.
You want to keep it a little vague because we don't want to know what she needs to accept, that she was an abuse victim, right? And that, like, maybe the way to handle that isn't through violence, that, like, yeah, but you can have her saying here, like, I didn't have a choice. This was the only way I knew how to handle it at the time. Does that make sense?
Uh-huh. The other thought I had was that as she's writing it, um, I have some third person in there of the of the reader,
Mm.
um, or of her as she's writing it. And then at the end, um, when she's finally done and she gives it to Connor to read what she's written, and he says, well, he asks her some kind of question about it, and then it like all comes full force. The full impact comes to
Yeah.
her, um, just exactly what her father had done to her.
Yeah, and you need some kind of, like, if you're going to do this, like, letter from the future that that I'm telling my story, you need her to be teaching some kind of grand lesson.
Uh-huh.
She needs to have some kind of, like, I'm writing this to teach you this. And so, there's a couple um ways to handle that. Like, there's a couple lessons in here that naturally flow from this. One is, like, trauma is not your fault and you do the best you can. Right? Like,
Uh-huh.
that would be kind of a lesson in here that I could see coming out of this story. Another lesson kind of coming out of this story would be like, you can't let your past trauma dictate your present self.
Hmm.
Right? Like, that's a very clear lesson in here, that, like, she's running away from her trauma, and then she's allowing the trauma to tell her that she can't have the best. And then here, the trauma is, while she's coping through this, like, successful life, she's also living in this area where she continues to repeat this event that she's ashamed of. So the trauma still has a hold on her until finally here, the trauma doesn't have a hold on her anymore. So it's that, like, you can't let your trauma live your life for you type. So
Hmm.
but I would say, like, you got to find that grand lesson, and that grand lesson lands your final event.
Right.
I would try to bring back Kate in the end,
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
because you introduce her here and then she kind of disappears.
She's kind of in there, like, but they grow apart because Kate Connor is Kate's um, cousin.
Yeah.
So that's what they kind of, their relationship is stretched there.
Mm,
But she kind of still weaves in and out with letters or whatever.
gotcha.
But
So the
it's
natural
kind of
plot point
for
here is
everybody.
that Kate re-enters in an abusive relationship. That's the natural plot point. And
Okay.
then in this third section, she's going to help Kate escape.
Okay.
Um, does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
That would be the natural, like, flow. If we're talking like Save the Cat, bringing back the B characters, Kate's your B character here. She's got to come back in the end in order to create this moment um where Bonnie can come to terms with Bonnie.
Okay.
Yeah. So I could see you doing something like Kate comes back, they reconnect. Bonnie, you have a scene where Bonnie notices that something's wrong, that Kate's not herself. Bonnie has a couple scenes where she's going to play kind of like detective with Connor. They're going to discover that Kate has fallen into this abusive relationship with this person. And then Bonnie is going to first be tempted just to, like, take care of the dude herself, and then come to terms with, like, okay, that doing that doesn't actually empower Kate to do anything, or doesn't empower Kate to deal with her trauma, and we can't just let this trauma like control our actions. So then you want Bonnie like coming to Kate, and much like Floyd did with her, you want Bonnie coming to Kate and then having them to handle it together to set Kate and Bonnie up for success. Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
Like almost giving Kate her voice back so that Kate doesn't run away in shame like Bonnie did. Kate stands up to her abuser in a healthy way that kind of gives her freedom from him.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be the natural, like that. So that would be like from the story you're telling, that would be the natural climax, something like that, where Bonnie slash Eliza helps someone else deal with similar trauma, but in a way that's not going to cause them deep shame. Yeah,
Okay.
and in that, Bonnie finds freedom for who she is. Yeah, does that make sense?
It does. Uh-huh.
Is that helpful, or is that just like,
My wheels are turning.
yeah? And again, you have 1,000 options, right? Like part of this, I'm just throwing ideas. Part of this is,
Uh-huh.
there's one thing to come up with a plot line like this. There's another thing to actually like write it out. Like that's the hard part, right? Like anybody
Right.
can sit there and yeah. Um, yeah. So what else? How else can I help? What else do you need to talk about?
I think that that was that's pretty good. So do you think, as far as the I mean, I love the first person. I love her voice. And she's going to her writing, her voice is going to get more sophisticated as the story goes.
Hmm.
The first couple of chapters, she sounds like a little kid, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that kind of follows. But what do you think about the idea of putting those third person um, things in there, or do you think that's just muddies the waters, or do you think that that
It's
gives you insight into in another, from another point of view?
it's about consistency and reader engagement. So
Mhm.
you have to establish a pattern and then live by that pattern. So
Mhm.
like if you're gonna mix them, I would probably start each section and end each section with a part of the letter, but then write the section itself in third person. Does that make sense? So if
Okay, I
that,
kind of had it the other way around.
yeah, and you could have it the other way around.
The
Um,
reason,
I
because
mean, you
when I
could, there are
first
no
opened,
rules, Joy. Like you can do
yeah.
whatever. Yeah. I'm trying to conceptualize the other way around.
So when I opened the very first chapter, you have Eliza sitting down with her Bordeaux in her crystal glass at her electric typewriter, and she starts typing about this little. She says, she lets Bonnie out, so to speak, and
Okay.
she starts typing about this little girl. So she's going to become that person from the minute the book opens, but you don't know how she becomes that person, and that's part
Gotcha.
of
So
the
your third person is like a flashback to the future
exactly.
and where she, yeah, I think that could totally work. And I would put it at the beginning and end of each section.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Um, and those moments need to be moments of self-reflection where she's explaining, we see her start the letter, and the first of her letter needs to be about like for this first section, I'd have her sitting with her crystal glass, like drinking and starting to type on the typewriter. And maybe the first word she writes or something like, let me, I'm writing this letter to explain to you um, who I am, or the parts of me that you don't know, and
Okay.
why I hid them and how I've come to terms with them.
Okay.
And then I'd have her like say something like, my story begins um, with fire and shame, or something like that. And then you go to the first person where she's living in abuse. And but do you see how like I'm transitioning each at the beginning of each section? You want to use that vehicle to set up a like conflict that's going to be solved.
Right. That's kind
And
of what I had in mind. Yeah.
yeah, and then at the end of each section, you want to come back to, you want these transitions here and here, where she's like at the end of a section where she's reflecting on what's happened and giving you that like teaser for what's coming. Right. You'd think that after I ran that my life as Eliza would be satisfying, but the ghost of the fire, or I could never get the smell of the smoke out of my life. Right. Like, so, and then that would be like the reflection, and then the teaser would be like, you know, and I started to accept that, like, I'll smell of the smoke my entire life. And that if I don't keep it hidden, everyone will always smell it around me. Right. Like, I don't know. I'm being weirdly metaphorical, but you know what I mean? That, like, you want that teaser in between each section that's like, here's where we were, and here's a teaser to where we're going.
Right. I got
Right.
it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, I think that could be I think that vehicle could work really well.
Well,
Yeah.
I lost you there for a minute.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said I think that vehicle could work really well. That, like,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, that tool of like flipping POVs, giving us these reflective moments, especially since you're telling a lifelong story,
Uh-huh.
where you're like moving from one major, you're doing these time jumps. You can have that moment of like reflection that then leads to the next time jump.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good.
I wouldn't feel the need. I think something we do as writers that I find is a mistake is that we feel the need to explain everything that happens in a time jump. You don't
Right.
need to. You can just
Right.
pick up
It
where
gets,
it is.
it gets, that's where it gets, that's why you have 1,000-page novels.
Yeah, you don't need to. Well, but like,
Right.
even like between like this big time jump between 56 and 64, you don't have to explain how she became a successful real estate agent. You don't have to explain how she owned multiple restaurants. You can just pick up with her being who she is. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Right.
Yeah, and the reader will get it. We'll be like, oh, look at what we did. The movies do this really well all the time. They just like jump from one time to another, and they're like, now I'm this person. And it,
Right.
it works, I think part of what forces that in that type of storytelling is that your screenplay is limited by page numbers. So you have to keep it tight. Um, yeah, same kind of thing here. You keep it tight. Don't feel the need to like give us the 20 years in between
Okay. Right.
jumps. Yeah. All right. Anything else you want to talk about?
I think that's good. I got to
Okay.
get ready now, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Now you got to write it. We did the easy part. Now you got to do the hard part.
Well, it's a
Um,
funny thing is, I been writing this in little bits and pieces because
mhm,
I care for my husband. He's disabled, so
mhm.
I have like these little moments that so I I spent over the holiday. I kind of missed a big chunk
Yeah.
and of time writing, and I when I went back and started redoing the timeline, I realized I'd skipped a year because I have her at the first Newport Jazz Festival, which has to be 1954, and then I
Yeah.
have her at the opening of My Fair Lady on Broadway, which has to be 1956. But I missed 1955 altogether.
That's really funny.
So
That's
now I have a
hysterical.
reason to have 1955 from what
Yeah.
just you told me. Oh, there,
Nice.
that fits in
Yeah.
1955.
It works perfectly. Yeah. That's hysterical. All right. Well, I'm going to stop the recording. We can talk a little bit more.
Okay, great. Thanks.